Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Simon Hunt of Simon Hunt Strategic Services, SHSS. Plenty of years, over 40 years of consultancy services and over 3 years in China, providing valuable and often contrarian insights on the global economy, China, and the copper industry. Simon, thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. Delighted to be
Plen-
here.
Yes, really looking forward to this. Plenty to talk about. And I guess my fully loaded question to start is from your point of view, from a geopolitical point of view, what's going on at the moment? We've seen Iran, Israel, USA get involved. Then there might be a ceasefire, then there might not be. So much to talk about. What's your view of what's going on?
Yeah, it's a big, big question. I mean, there is a view that the Israeli attacks on Iran, the American attacks on Iran, um, the retaliatory attack by Iran on Qatar were all um, part of a theater in order for Israel to satisfy itself. We've attacked Iran, we've destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities and destroyed most of their um, missile launchers, and we've set in motion regime change. Now, that's a view, if you listen to Washington, it's very much the Washington view too. The view here is somewhat different, and I adhere to it. First of all, the 2009 Brookings Institute plan on creating regime change in Iran has been percolating throughout different American administrations until the point has arrived where Trump says the time is here. So this is not something suddenly emerging onto the world scene. It's been a long-term plan, just as Ukraine has been a long-term plan by America stroke NATO to use Ukraine as a stepping stone into Russia.
Mhm.
So back to the Middle East. What my sense is that Israel had been weakened very severely by Iran's ability to penetrate the Iron Dome and the American defense systems to an extent that they have created significant damage to military installations, oil installations, depots, and general infrastructure, and that their missile stocks were running low to a point that, what day are we talking about? That on Sunday or Monday, they pressed Washington to organize a ceasefire. The question now is, will the ceasefire be solid, or is it fragile? And how long will it last? From what I pick up, I think this is only a lull in a long-term war, and I'll come on to that in a minute,
Mhm.
but that it's quite possible that Iran won't abide by the ceasefire, and knowing that Israel is weakened, will continue to strike Israel. I think also that there is a division within the Iranian leadership, with the president all along wanting accommodation with America and the West, whereas the supreme leader will not give up Iran's sovereignty, because by accommodating Iran to the West's wishes effectively leads to regime change and the introduction of the Shah's son to lead Iran. So you could call the president as a snake in the undergrowth. It's interesting that Iran's foreign minister visit to Moscow to talk with Putin was not on the demand by the president, but by the supreme leader. So we need to look at Iran in a bigger picture. First of all, as I mentioned, for 16 years at least, American policy has been to create regime change
Mhm.
in Iran, and Israel's policy for 25 plus years has been to ensure that Iran has no ability to upgrade its nuclear facilities from civilian usage to military.
Mhm.
Then on the other side, you've got China and Russia and the rest of the BRICS group of nations. Iran is a very critical logistical hub between the east-west and north-south corridors. And only recently has the railway from Xi'an in western China to Tehran been completed. And the first train, very recently, from China arrived in Tehran. The importance of that railroad is huge, because it more than cuts the sea route time in half, and it bypasses all of America's various choke points along the sea route. And the railroad can transport oil should the Straits of Hormuz be shut down. So Russia and China and Iran know that the long-term objective of America is to destroy the BRICS group of nations before they become a visible risk to America's hegemony. So the three countries know that if Iran is defeated, then the next step will be for Washington to go after Russia. First, by trying to persuade Russia to break up their alliance with China. And if that is unsuccessful, which is probably so, then the full forces of NATO, including America, will be launched against Russia. And then finally, the plan will be to strangle China. So there is a much bigger picture than just the regional one, and which is why I think that the theater analysis is wrong, because it goes back to the last 16 years in the Brookings Institute report, and the script that was written then is being followed very closely.
Brookings Institute. But I'm just making a note of that just so I remind myself to put a link into the show notes for that. So I was speaking to Dr. Anis Al-Haji the other day on the podcast, and he made a very good point that if you just look at the overall geography of Iran, and he pointed not just to the strait, he mentioned, the inroads or inrails from China to Iran as well. And he pointed out if you look at where Iran, what's to the north of Iran, i.e. the Caspian Sea, and look who borders that, and it's obviously Iran, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, I think Kazakhstan, and Russia. And his point was that, Iran is not going to, or Russia will not allow any form of US pro movement in Iran. And what you're saying is that there are some counter things within Iran itself, so it could go one way or the other. Um, am I right in saying that, or is that too basic approach?
I think it's very clear, talking to people who know Iran and live in Iran, that since Israel began attacking Iran, followed by America, the people have been united. And they know that there are groups in Iran who've been trying to impose regime change by bombing and blah, blah, blah. And one guy made the very interesting comment that everybody is looking over their shoulders. Is this guy over there legit? And you are hearing stories of the police, the IDF rounding up many people. So I think that contrary to what Israel and America wanted, which is to force regime change, they've failed, because you look throughout history, regime changes only occur internally in the country, not from an external force.
Yes, absolutely. I'll bring up a link to uh, things within Iran in the last 100 years. I'll add that into the show notes for this as well, because that's a very good point well made. That if you're trying to force, yeah, I think people bandish around regime change like it's very easy to do and we can do it tomorrow. But as you said, what you need, if you're going to force such a thing, is you need everyone from within to rise up. And that might happen at any point. It might not happen at all. So it's really a case of watch this space at the moment.
Yeah.
Moving on to the bigger picture then, and on your website you have a fantastic map that shows US and NATO bases against or where they are, in and around Europe, and then also Asia, US, Asia Pacific bases as well. Now, the reason I bring that up is because you've just mentioned that part of the USA's very long-term plan could be to choke China. With your permission, I'll copy and paste that and put a link to that map in there.
Sure.
Um, Russia, Ukraine, NATO. I think you've highlighted a little bit already. I've long been against the idea of NATO expanding borders, etc., etc. Again, I've just asked a 30,000 foot view. What's your opinion on how that's played out and what could possibly play out moving forwards, given all the other cards that you've just spoken about?
Sorry, I didn't gather what the question is.
What are your views on how Russia and Ukraine's unfolded in the last few years and what could potentially happen moving forward,
Oh,
given
okay,
everything else?
okay. Um, Moscow very clearly now wants for its future security, given the fact that within a few years, America will have hypersonic technology, if not something similar. And therefore, drawing a boundary along the Dnieper River would not give Russia sufficient advance warning of impending missile attacks. So I think that Russia will gain control over all of Ukraine that it wants. It's positioned to do so. It's already attacking military installations in and around Kiev. It has troops located in the northeast who could move on to Kiev. And in the south, they've got troops that can move onto Odessa. The bulk are moving towards the Dnieper River and probably beyond. And the Ukrainian front line along the whole of the 1,000 kilometers, from what I hear, is on the point of collapsing. The question then is, will some EU countries be prepared to see Russia taking over the greater part of Ukraine? And does that mean that they will physically move into Ukraine? The risk of that is high, given what they are saying. So if that happens, then the war over Ukraine will become de facto a war between NATO and Russia. It really already is, but it will become openly so. And what is that? What will that impact be on sentiment in Europe and business, not just household sentiment, but business sentiment? And will it lead to EU governments or the EU itself introducing capital controls? Already in Spain, de facto, there is a capital control, very quietly instigated. Um, if you're going on holiday, you're only allowed to take 3,000 euros out. And if you want, for an investment purposes, to take more than 100,000 euros out as a corporation, you have to get permission. So the foundations are being laid for capital controls should the EU decide to physically go into Ukraine. What's the risk of that? It's in my book, it's at least 50-50, given what these guys are saying.
If we look at Russia, USA, NATO, etc., another component that some people might talk about is that the EU and UK and so forth have got themselves into a financial hole as well. And as we know from history, 9 times out of 10, war is going to be the answer. Do you think anything to do with the financial mechanisms around the USA and Europe, this is also why people are wanting to go down this route?
Well, yeah, the EU needs a diversion tactic. You've got horrible intergovernment debt via Target 2. You've got electorates that are getting frustrated, if not angry, by the power that Brussels holds over their own economies, in contrast to their national governments. And you've got the immigration issue. So they need a diversionary tactic, and that diversionary tactic is to enjoin the war in Ukraine.
I know that we were, and I won't mention where we are respectively in the world, but I know you were mentioning off air that where you are at the moment is a very good melting pot of different people and people going about their business, but there's no day-to-day conflict as such. It's just people living their lives. Whereas what we're seeing through designed policy, however you want to describe it, is a lot of these social issues now becoming even more prominent by the day. Especially if I go back and look at news, in the UK about, well, it seems like the Labour government's trying to do everything they can to destroy the country even more, which is sad. The point being, I guess, sorry, rambling on. I always like to be optimistic, or try to be realistic, and give people ideas of what they can do to protect themselves. So again, we're speaking about regime change over here, potential, more conflict in more theatres of war moving forward. That could cause a lot of unrest for a lot of people. So if people want to try and protect themselves and their families, some ideas of how people could do that moving forward.
Paper money increasingly becomes worthless. So households should always hold some gold. So gold will fluctuate in price. If you've already got gold, buy more gold on the dips. Food prices are going to soar, partly because of changing weather patterns. Nothing to do, I would add, by climate change. That's just a political game, no reality to it at all. So if you have a garden, make sure that you convert some of that garden into a vegetable garden, and always see that you've got more food in the fridge than you need for daily purposes. Water is also Water and electricity are also two key components. There are small generators available that can power your house. They in turn are powered by solar panels. So they're a good investment. Depends where you are as to how you can secure your water supply.
Mm.
If you're by the sea, there are small desalination plants available on the market. If not, I don't know what you do.
Fair enough. Thanks for providing that information. You mentioned there about the weather and that people are trying to control it, and it's not about climate change. Dive into that if you can, because I'm sure there's going to be some people listening that are aware of what you're talking about. I imagine most people won't have an idea, so please do elaborate on what's been going on with regards to trying to control the weather.
Very simply, climate change was a PR exercise conducted by the Davos crowd as another means of controlling people. The real scientists debunk it completely. Weather goes in long-term cycles, 40 years plus. And we are moving out of 40 years of warming weather into 40 odd years of cooling weather. This could start within, where are we now, 2025, within a couple of years. And weather patterns are driven by sunspot activity. And sunspot activity has been weakening for some time. The oceans, with warming weather, warm themselves and are unable to absorb excess CO2 emissions. But earlier this year, I think it was in January, there's a there's a huge amount of cold water that is trapped around Greenland. And when the ice melts, it releases that cold water into the Atlantic and so cools it. That is happening now. So we are going to move into completely different climatic conditions, which affects the way one lives. But so far as food is concerned, there is a 90-year Gleisberg cycle that 90 odd years ago caused the 1930s Midwest, US Midwest Dust Bowl, when nothing grew. And there are reports suggesting that that could break out next year. So
So
food,
expect a lot of change ahead.
I mean, there are other reasons too. Energy prices will be rising. So you add it all in, we're going to see, we're coming out just as we did in the 1970s. We had rising inflation, we then plateaued and troughed and came up again. And we're in that troughing stage now. So next year, we will start seeing US and global inflation really starting to pick up. Food prices in the FAO food price index for May this year is up 6% year on year, with a couple of the ingredients, I think it was meat and vegetable oils, up like 20%. So inflation is coming back with a vengeance. Food prices will rise. So, as I said, if you've got a garden, convert some of it into a vegetable garden and see that you stock in your fridge more food than you need for daily consumption.
Simon, just as we wrap up, I appreciate we've discussed a lot about a lot of important issues. We've looked at Iran, Israel, USA, Russia, China, NATO, and so forth. What people could do moving forwards, and then how people are trying to control the weather and weather patterns. Is there anything you haven't yet spoken about that you think people should know about, people need to know about before we wrap up?
I think the overall advice is that the next 5 years, economically and financially, markets are going to be extremely volatile. Don't think about long-term investment. Just play the cycles. On our cycle work, we've got a down cycle until the early months of next year. Then we have an 18, 24 months of recovery, which will be recovery in financial markets, equity markets, and the global economy, but very inflationary driven. So that inflation will take long-term bond yields, government bond yields, back into double-digit figures. And given the highly leveraged US and global financial system, that will lead to a crash. So the moral is you've got short-term cycles in equity markets and bond markets. Play those cycles. Don't think about long-term investment.
I think that's a very good place to wrap up. Simon, thank you for your time. If people want to find out more about yourself and your work, I've got Simon Hunt Strategic Services.substack.com. I'll link to that in the show notes. Also, simon-hunt.com.
Yeah, simon@hunt.com. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll put those links into the show notes. Plenty to mull about, plenty to think about. Thank you again for your time and look forward to catching up, hopefully in 2026.
Super. Thank you very much for having me.